On today's podcast, we bring on Jon Cara and Jeff Leiter of the RINK Training Centre in Winnipeg. Not your favorite destination for a vacation, but I can't think of a better place for a hockey player to train.
Wait, hold on. Have you ever been to Winnipeg?
No.
Okay, listen, don't besmirch Winnipeg. I was there in the summer a couple years ago. It's quite nice. I think that, it gets a bad name because it's like small compared to the other NHL markets. There's nothing wrong with Winnipeg. Okay.
So it sounds like Columbus, it gets a
Well,
bad rap, but really you go there and you
Cleveland.
just fall in love with the place. That's
You're
why
in
all the guys
Cleveland.
say that's,
Cleveland.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it was Noah of the NBA. He's like, Cleveland. I've never heard anyone say they're going to vacation to Cleveland.
Yeah, he did say that. That was tough.
So same stuff, but this was just an absolute wonderful conversation. For anyone who's nerdy into how to become a better skater, this will for sure make you a better skater. Or if you're a coach, this will help you teach so many players effectively.
Yeah, and selfishly, it'll also help me, the beer league player. I got a few helpful tips and tricks along the way, which I'm excited to introduce into my game. Although they were careful to make sure that I didn't maybe make all of these adjustments all at once before a game. So it'll be interesting to see how we get there. But anyway, this conversation seriously could have gone on for hours and hours, and I know Greg and I both had to like par down our follow-up list just for the sake of time, but I think everyone's going to really enjoy this episode.
Oh yeah, it's a bit longer than we normally do it, but I'm not sure we can cut anything out of this. Grab a notebook. Everyone needs to go grab a notebook right now.
Oh, and a dictionary.
Open up your phone, do notes. Yeah, pull up a beer if you're of age, of course. Otherwise, bring up a Gatorade and sit down and enjoy it, because this is a good one.
Without further ado, our interview with Jeff Leiter and Jon Cara.
Welcome to the podcast, Jon Cara and Jeff Leiter. Did I say your names correctly?
You're close, Cara.
Mine's Leiter.
Start over.
Cara and Leiter. Wonderful. Off to a great start. Well, you both are very, very much accomplished, and I am not. So I think we'll make sure the direction of the conversation is coming from you guys. So maybe a little bit of background for listeners that don't know the rink and what you're doing up there, and then we'll dive into the good stuff.
For sure, yeah. We, Jeff and myself are both directors at the RINK Training Centre. We're based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. At our training center, we've got a couple different ice sheets that we have set up. So we have a 120 by 60 ice sheet that we use as a training sheet. We also have a goalie pad that we have set up, as well as a full NHL sized rink on the one side. So what we've tried to create at our facility is a one-stop shop. So not only do we have the ice surfaces, but we've also got a state-of-the-art gym upstairs, and Leets can touch a little bit on what we do in there. But we're basically trying to create a place that an athlete can come at any age and go through the development process with us and achieve whatever their goals are. So we started as a small training sheet, so that's why we kept it in at our old facility. All we used to have was 110 by 50 ice sheet, and it just started with an idea from our owners, and kind of blossomed from there. So I work on the development side, and Leets oversees our off ice side of things and sports science. So
Okay, let's start even further back. Like, where was the impetus for this idea, and how did you guys get connected?
So for me, I was playing at the time at University of Manitoba, and there was a new training facility that was popping up, and it was like I said, the concept was a small ice sheet. It was going to be used for 3-on-3. It had a gym in it. It was a real high-end facility. And at the time, my assistant coach was one of the original guys that was starting here. One of my best buddies, who was the opportunity to start as a part-time coach with the facility, and then me from our ownership group over the years that allowed me to get to this position. knowing Leitz, I used to go to Gimli Hockey School that his dad used to run. So I used to look up to Leitz when he would teach me on the ice. And then I used to run away from him in roller hockey when he used to chase me around the ice. So that's how I got to know Leitz.
So was Jeff a bit of a fighter? Have you thrown some knuckles in your day?
Yeah, you don't get a nose like this from scoring goals, Craig. So there was, yeah. You know, after obviously university and stuff, I went and played semi-pro, and that's where kind of the fights escalated and everything like that. But it was, yeah, to be honest, I kind of enjoyed that part of the game, and it was usually a response to, you know, I wouldn't be somebody that would jump on the ice and just, you know, step on the ice and go looking for a fight. I played a physical game, and usually from there things kind of transpired the way they did. I was lucky enough to, you know, come across the rink. So I was head of a sports medicine research foundation at Pan Am Clinic, and ran a physio clinic there as well. And at the same time, I was consulting for NHL teams and started kind of a testing business on the side. And that was sort of the start of some conversations with, you know, with ownership of the rink, and, you know, how I felt in the testing world, things should have been done differently or could have been done differently, and how, you know, there was a real need in hockey to integrate numbers with training, and, you know, not just give players a number sheet and say, this is kind of where you stand, which is traditionally what's done at, you know, camps. And so training camps is more credentialing, right? You just want to go in there and, yeah, I mean, you could be gone 2 days later and you got to come in there and perform. And it's not about, you know, necessarily developing players, but at a younger age, and certainly with the groups that Jon and his team work with, there's a huge opportunity that you can use those numbers to obviously reinforce what the coaches do. The great thing about Jon is very open-minded. So, you know, no idea is off the radar. And it's like, well, let's go test it. You know, let's go try it and see if what we think is actually working. And then if there's a strong feeling that it is, yeah, then we'll kind of bring it into what he's doing with the players and stuff like that. But I know we can talk a lot about this, and that's kind of the reason for the podcast. So my introduction went over. I stepped over the line on my introduction.
No worries. It's going to be awesome.
There are no rules here.
Okay, good.
Not enough rules. There's, you know, one rule is Dan's in charge, and we're all helping him look good.
We'll go with that.
But diving deeper into that, so you said you did some consulting. You're working with teams. What does that look like? And then I'm curious, if we want to dive deeper, what numbers are you looking at? What kind of data are you trying to track?
So usually on the consulting side, what I've done with some NHL teams is I'll go in and set up their on and off ice testing. That can be for development camps, which are kind of, you know, mid off season. Those are normally held in July. And then for the main training camp. And so, you know, how it kind of started 10 or 12 years ago in being part of Pan Am and the Sports Medicine Clinic. They are a strong supporter and they work closely with the Jets. And the Jets just came back to Winnipeg and they wanted us to, you know, do the preseason testing. And so, yeah, it was a pretty rapid influx of information and equipment that we had to get in to set up, you know, for all the players to do VO2 testing, et cetera, and worked well for a couple of years. And then really got into the debate about, you know, is a bike test, you know, the best assessment of aerobic fitness for a hockey player, which is quite a different skill, obviously, than cycling. And so I stepped away from that meeting that was a little heated, and developed an on-ice beep test. And so in order to, you know, make that you know, accredited physiologically, we had to have lactate testing in between stages. We had to have heart rate. We had to prove that the guys really were reaching, you know, their maximum capacity and maximum aerobic capacity. And so that probably took about, you know, 8 or 10 months to develop. And then, you know, from there, it kind of, you know, since then, we've easily tested probably close to 2,000 players, right from the bantam age group up to 3 different NHL teams. So, you know, the one question always comes, well, you know, what happens if you have an efficient skater and he's not in that great a shape? And, you know, my response is, well, you need them to be able to skate at a certain speed and maintain that speed for, you know, for prolonged periods of time in a game or a short break in between. So you want them efficient, and you're going to have a combination of those guys that aren't that efficient, but have figured out physiologically and have worked themselves to a state where they can maintain that pace. And that's ultimately kind of what it comes down to. And that's how the test is sort of designed, is who are you going to be, or if you're double shifting, who can maintain the fastest speeds on the ice in terms of what we measure. So we've done some, you know, various correlations and stuff like that. And it certainly is correlated with the high minute guys on every team, which is what you want. So, you know, whether it's some of the defensemen or the forwards that, you know, are playing 20, 25 minutes a night, those are traditionally the guys that score the best on the on-ice beep test. And so from that perspective, it's valid in terms of it's, you know, it's telling us what we want to tell, who can play those high minutes at a high rate of speed. And so, yeah, so from there we've, that's kind of how it all started. And, you know, that we continue to use that test with all our hockey academy teams and, you know, NHL teams, and it's proven to be pretty effective.
Jeff, for the uninitiated, could you explain to our listeners what the beep test looks like?
Yeah, sure. So usually if you're trying to envision it in your head, you're starting from the goal line. The first cone is going to be somewhere around the center line. And so it's broken up into stages. And so each stage will have 8 lengths. So if I skate to center ice, that's 1 length. I skate back to the goal line, that's another length. So you do that 8 times, you get 8 seconds to get to the other stage, to get to the other cone. So as I start on the goal line and then I go to the red line, I have 8 seconds to get there. Then you hear the beep, and then you come back and you got to get to the next one for 8 seconds. So unlike the off-ice beep test that many people know, here we have around a 1 minute break in between. During that 1 minute break, we move the cone back another 3 meters. So now it's still, the beep's still happening every 8 seconds, because guys kind of get that timing in their head of the 8 seconds. But now they have to go further. So in order to go further in that 8 seconds, you have to go faster. And so, you know, our highest guys we've ever tested have been into stage 9. And I mean, that's almost goal line to goal line. And you're doing that repeatedly in 8 seconds. And so you're at a pretty good pace. You know, the majority NHL average is probably mid 8s. So you're kind of in the middle of the 8 stage, which guys are clipping pretty good at that point.
That's intense. I could never do that. My legs are way too short.
That's only one of your problems.
Yeah, one of many.
Yeah.
But I think this leads perfectly into Jon. I originally saw your work on skating through YouTube, and it was quite great what you had there. So I'm going to leave this open-ended and let you basically t-ball it up for you. But what is an efficient skater? What makes an efficient skater?
Well, I think, and you and I touched on this before when we talked, like for us, everyone's obviously finding ways to improve the efficiency of their skating, and you know, working with Jeff and through the testing and gathering the data, like he touched on, one of the biggest components to skating that we've identified is glide. And we just feel that in order to prove your efficiency, your balanced leg is so important. Your ability to stride to a certain area and be balanced in that position. But at some point, as you're striding and you're moving down the ice, you are going to reach a maximum speed, and your ability to maintain your speed through glide is the biggest component that we've been focusing on. So a lot of times you'll see players and going down the ice and just striding as fast as they can and keeping themselves moving. when really if they could realize if they were only able to take about 6 of those strides and then maintain their glide, and really focus on the glide phase of their skating, I think there's a ton of components that it would help them to improve with, whether it's on ice awareness, whether it's being able to read and react, instead of having to keep their feet moving. If they can get to that glide phase and improve that, it's a huge component. And for us, in some of the presentations I've done, glide it can be taught at the most basic phase. So as players are learning how to skate, I mean, teaching them proper glide, being able to maintain both edges on the ice is a huge thing when players are first learning how to skate. But it's a consistent thing that we feel can be worked on at every level. And if you look at some of the deficiencies in some of the players we work with in their skating, a lot of it relates back to glide. And you look at the best players in the game, they're able to be efficient because they have good glide. And as basic as it is, I think it's a massive component to skating efficiency.
One thing I noticed from my own coaching, and honestly when I played too, the same idea. When you're younger, and before some of your muscles are like fully developed, it almost behooves you to like have those quick choppy I mean, it doesn't, but like you convince yourself that you're taking up more real estate by pedal to the metal, quick choppy feet. Is that something that you've noticed too in your teachings, and how do you go about alleviating that?
Yeah, like I think in some cases, that's kind of the old school way of thinking, was always those quick choppy strides at the start. I think that what we've tried to work at when it comes to those types of things is how you can engage your blades. So we talk about blade engagement. So whether it's your outside edge, your inside edge, whether it's engaging your toes, your middle, or your heel. So we do a lot of work right from an intro level with players on having, we call it blade awareness. So getting them comfortable, getting to the toes, the heels, the middle, and feeling those positions. And then from there, we advance it into, a lot of work on, just glide, like I said before. So gliding on 2 skates, being able to jump and land in that good position, gliding, on single leg. I think, a lot of the games played on that unilateral type of movement where you're balanced on one foot. So we do a ton of work on that. But I think, like you said, like for us, it's every skater is unique. Some skaters will be efficient with those choppy, type of starting strides, but it's really how you break it down for them. Or, is a player efficient with that? Yes. Are they actually engaging their blades? Yes. Then build within that. Maybe you can increase their knee drive, etc. But like I said, I think every player is a little bit different how they move and get going on the ice.
So true, and it comes back to, and I'm going to let you take this one, either of you, the difference between kind of maybe like a velocity-based skater versus a force-based skater. You think probably McDavid's going to be more velocity, force would be more like Jack Eichel.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, Leitz and I were talking about this today, and you can touch on a little bit more, but coming back to, responding to Dan's question, I think the biggest thing for us is, like I said, is every player is different. So you just named 2 of the fastest skaters in the game, but 2 guys that, couldn't skate more differently. You look even at their lacing pattern in their skate, Eichel ties his skates all the way to the top on his, he's got his top eyelet done all the way to the top and it's tight. And then you look at McDavid, his skates are loose and he's, down that one eyelet. So again, every player is different. I think when we look at those 2 players, if you look at Eichel, we talked about him being a force-based type skater. He's got the longer strides. He generates a lot from that. Could we add in some velocity-based elements to his skating that would improve his speed? You look at McDavid, obviously he's, super fast. He's got great glide, a lot more ankle play in his skates. He generates a lot more force from a shorter stride. Are there elements that we could take from Eichel that we could add into his skating? So, when we talk about velocity and force-based, the idea at the end of the day is generating power. So you combine those 2 things together, you're going to maximize your power. But like I said, every player is a little bit different. So that's how we use that example is, approach every player differently and find their, strengths and where they fit. But Leitz, if you want to touch on that from your standpoint as well.
Yeah, I'll go back to probably the previous question leading into this one too. With the short choppy strides. So one thing John and I did this summer is we took video on the ice with our junior guys and our pro, and then also some speed sensors, and we were looking at just a straightforward 20-meter sprint. And I think, John, if I'm off on this, let me know, but I would say probably 95% of those players, regardless of level, weren't sure how to start or didn't have a clean start. And so, in a short period of time, and that was within the session, cleaning up a few of those things. And like John alluded to, a lot of it was blade engagement. It might not have been having the right blade engagement, or there would have been a slip, or they felt they should cross over, first. And so just really, and that's half a second. That's the difference between getting to that puck first and not getting to that puck first. And so a lot of times just cleaning up some of those areas, regardless of whether they're a power or a velocity skaters, just getting them to come clean off that stride, which John is obviously an expert at. And then the other part of that was over those 20 meters. So within the first 5 meters, on average, they were packing about 75% of their speed in the first 5 meters. So, as John's talking about, gliding and being efficient with the gliding. So you clean up that start a little bit, within that 5 meters, let's say we worked with them, can we pack 80% of their speed in those first 5 meters? And I'm sure everybody uses McDavid as an example, but when you look at him skate, it's those first 5 to 8 meters, he's at top speed. He'll be gliding by the time he hits the center line, and then he can do whatever he wants to the defenseman, because as John said, he's got both feet under his shoulders. He's more agile that way. He's not losing speed. He can stick handle better. He's not striding. So that's certainly something that we've been paying more attention to as well. And then force and velocity, like John said, force times velocity is power. And so how do we maximize the power? And that's a lot of things. It's easy for us to measure power in the gym. We have a lot of Kaiser equipment, which is power-based equipment, really. And so for us to measure power in the gym, it's really easy. But what and I work with John a lot on this is that player displaying that power on the ice? So it's great they're powerful in the gym, but if that power isn't translating to what's going on the ice, then is it a technique issue? Is it an equipment modification that needs to be done? As John mentioned, lacing your skates right to the top, not having much ankle mobility, you take away one of the most powerful muscles in your body, which is your gastrocnemius, right? So, and I'm not saying we change that for everybody, but there will be some players.
Let's simplify that fancy word there for a second.
I was waiting for you guys to say something.
Your calf muscles. So, and again, that's not for everybody, but you can, if you look at a speed skate, for instance, their skates are cut low, and those guys have massive calves, right? Because when they're using their clap skate effectively, again, they're two different sports, but that's one thing, John and I go back and forth a lot on, is what other sports or techniques or modifications can we use that might improve what's going on in hockey? And so, again, that where somebody is generating that power from, it might be, more forceful strides and not as many. But it's also important for the player to know what is their optimal stride pattern, what is their optimal profile. And some of them, especially at a young age, don't know yet. And it's part of, John's team, that's what they do. And, with us, if we can support that with numbers in terms of, developing a skating profile for that player. So when a coach says, come on, you got to move your feet quicker, or those strides got to be choppier at the front or at the start. And then it's like, well, actually, my stride profile is, it doesn't support that I should be doing that. So, but yeah, so that's kind of a lot of where that goes back and forth between us.
All right. Well, there's like 1,000 different directions to take this, but I got to stay on the start because I think this is so fascinating. And I guess with the caveat that I guess anything that Greg or I'll ask will be with the same caveat that like every player is obviously different. You mentioned like McDavid and Eichel, even two of the best players in the world, skate totally different. Is there a generally better way to start, like your first 5 meters, say? Is there like a certain way that we should be teaching that's a more generally accepted approach?
Well, John, I'll go to a few numbers.
Yeah, you go ahead, Leeds.
Yeah.
This obviously starting is very situational, right? So one thing though that we have easily proven is a crossover start is going to be slower. And again, sometimes you have to stop and you have to cross over, but you have to think when you're crossing a crossover start, you're bringing your foot over. Now you're turning your center of gravity. By the time you've taken a half second just to reposition yourself, somebody that is effective at more of a staggered start is already a meter ahead or half a meter ahead. And so again, that comes down to how clean is their staggered start. Do you get them to the point where, you know, they're not, you know, they're not losing speed because their blade isn't slipping and stuff like that. But that's, you know, when I do the sprint testing at NHL camps or whatever, well, one example was one guy wasn't happy with his time and they get 2 trials and he comes back and he's all upset and everything. And he's like, oh, what should I do different? I'm like, well, don't do a crossover start. So he does it and he flies through it and he's almost half a second faster. He comes back, he goes, well, my skating coach has been teaching me for years to do a crossover start. What should I do? I'm like, well, you should probably have a good talk with your skating coach. But that's just an easy, like that's honestly a 2-minute fix is to, you know, kind of teach that other start effectively. And I can turn it over to John because he knows a lot better on, you know, the technique and stuff like that in terms of, you know, habits that you want to instill in those players.
Yeah, like, and just building on what Leeds said, like when he refers to the staggered start, you know, just for you guys and your listeners, like with a staggered start, it's not like we're trying to reinvent the wheel. It's basically just having your feet in a ready stance. So if you look at players, how they set up off a face-off, you're never going to see a player set up in a V start where their feet are, you know, their heels are turned into that position. Very rarely are you going to see them set up in an L start. So it's kind of right in between an L or a V start. You've basically got one foot set, your dominant foot is set back. And all we've done with that is, again, come back to the blade engagement. We've just worked with players to just rotate their ankle in a bit so they can set the edge so they're ready to take off. So, you know, you watch any hockey game and you watch players set up for a face-off and they're waiting for that puck to draw. They're all set up in that stagger position. So for us, it's just been, what's your dominant foot? What's the first foot that you usually push off with? Set that edge, and right away, like Leach said, we've been able to prove it that you know, that's your most efficient start. So you know, for us, that's, you know, again, we're trying to prove everything we do. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to find ways that, you know, guys can be more efficient. So if we can give that player that extra point whatever a second, you know, we know that they're going to get to that puck first and be able to make a play. So
wonderful stuff. I love that you guys are putting so much data behind what you're doing. I feel sometimes people make it as a crutch, like, oh, you have to have data for things to be good, but it's great when you have these great thoughts and ideas and then able to take it and prove how it works. So I'm curious on all of the research, Jeff, that you've done, maybe what are some interesting stats out there or great things that people should be aware of or able to help them improve their game and improve their skating or anything in the gym as well?
I think one of the most challenging parts of hockey and hockey training is proving the translation on the ice. And so what I mean by that is it's not hard for us to get somebody stronger in the gym. That's, you know, that those kind of, you know, there's a lot of programs out there and stuff like that. But with the, you know, with the sport of hockey and you know, how different it is from, let's say, sprinting off ice. So sprinting off ice, sagittal plane is really just going straight forwards and back, or your limbs moving straight forwards and back. So that's pretty much what we do in a lot of things that we do, you know, every day. But now you're taking the skating stride where you're pushing out to the side, this lateral rotation and hip extension. And I think we see, you know, there's enough hip and abdominal injuries and stuff like that. I think a lot of the abdominal injuries actually come from shooting. I don't think they come from skating as much, and it's the torque that you're putting on your trunk when you're shooting. But it's just, yeah, it's not, I mean, it's not a given that somebody that's powerful, we get them more powerful in the gym. It's not a given that they're more powerful on the ice. And at the end of the day, I mean, that's, you know, really in terms of variables and metrics, I think power is one of the metrics we certainly believe in. And that's really, you know, optimizing it for each player and saying, okay, well, if we know if we can get you to this power, you will be this speed on the ice. We're not there yet. Nobody's there yet. But that's ultimately where we want to take it to, is that we have, you know, those numbers to, and maybe it's based on anthropometry. So if, you know, guys are shorter, we know that this is their power profile that we need based on their weight. But we can say, yeah, once we get them to there, we're pretty good, that we know when Johnny has him on the ice, he'll be happy once we get him on the ice, that, you know, he's executing what it can be. I think from a research perspective, this is not so much performance. Probably one of the most interesting publications I've worked on is we were looking at ACL injuries in the NHL and return to play. And so we were comparing that to NFL football, basketball, etc. When we first started the project, you know, a few of the docs that I had worked with were like, nah, there's no way there's that many ACL injuries in the NHL. And it was from my playing history, my last year, 3 of us blew our ACL. And when we went back to when we're doing all the stats, it's actually more common that an NHL player will rupture their ACL than an NBA player. And that's one stat that, you know, kind of popped out. It's not an injury we usually talk a lot about or think about in the NHL, but, and I mean, you're out for usually minimum 10 months. So, you know, somebody early in their career and stuff like that, or in the NHL, that, you know, has a pretty significant impact. So in training people in the gym, you know, that's something that we got to be aware of, is, you know, there are ACL prevention programs and different movement patterns that we always want to reinforce, so they're less susceptible to that injury when they get on the ice. Because you put all that work in with your skills coach, and, you know, your off ice coach, is the last thing you want to be doing is on the sideline for 10 months because there was an injury that we might have been able to prevent.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I never would have guessed that, especially when compared to the NBA. One thing you guys had mentioned earlier is that the facility, the rink, has 3 sheets, but only one of them's regulation size. And I think that's fascinating, especially given how it seems to me that your focus is on skating. How do you reconcile a smaller sheet or smaller sheets with the skating research? Like, because in my mind, I would have expected, like, if there's 3 sheets, one of them to almost be bigger, right? Like an Olympic pad or something like that. But I'm familiar with, like, the benefits of the smaller rink. I'm not sure all of our listeners are, so maybe you can speak to that a little bit, but maybe just talk about how you can use those to your advantage.
Yeah, so, you know, if you guys, and I know you guys watch a lot of hockey, but if you watch hockey, the majority, if you were to take everything outside of the dots and below the ringette line, you know, out of the game. So if you basically just took the dots and made a rink within that area, that's what our training sheet's like. And if you watch the game, that's really the, you know, the space that you're going to see that's used on the ice. So one of the interesting things about our sheet is that it challenged us in a lot of different ways to find, you know, ways to make the ice effective. It was a completely different way to teach. So, you know, when we look at our ice, when it comes to skating, it basically replicates the areas that everybody wants to work on. So you want to work at, you know, skating under pressure. You want to work at small area agility. You want to work at speed and quickness. It forces players to do that on our ice. So basically, if you when we have 3-on-3 games on our ice, players are forced to utilize all the different areas, the small area skating techniques that we now teach. So one of our top programs that we have is small area power skating, and it focuses all on speed and quickness, decelerations, different styles of tight turns, deception down low. And again, none of that would have been developed if we weren't working on a training sheet. So it's basically the game within the game is the best way that I would describe it. Is, you watch an NHL game and you put those guys on our ice, there's nowhere for them to escape, whether you're a player or a goalie. Goalies come out for workouts on that ice, and probably for them it's the biggest challenge because their angles are off. But when it comes to skating, there's no better setup than what we have there with the small sheet. So, and then you've got the ability to transition to the full sheet if you really need it to really open things up. But again, the majority of, like we said, you really only need those first few meters to get going. So that's what we want players to focus on. And then we want to work at that glide outside of that. So tons of reasons, and benefits from that sheet.
Following up on that, you'd mentioned doing some tight turns and details like that. So I know in your past work, you've done work on turns, and I'm curious if you can please break down these 3 terms for us. First off, the punch turn, the jam turn, and then the toe turn.
For us, and we debate this as a coaching group all the time, but we've got we've got our punch turn. So basically, we're a little biased. One of the best players that we used to think that was able to use it for deception was Slaney. So we used to call it a Slaney turn, but we changed it to a punch. So basically, the way that we describe it is it's used for deception. So it's basically where a player is selling with one foot that they're going to stop up or turn, while the other foot keeps their momentum going forward. So basically it's used for deception. You're off the rush. You've created some open ice. You want to be able to punch and be able to take that ice and step into that area. For a jam turn, now you're using the punch and you're able to use a full jam to come out of it. So basically you're punching with the foot, but your back foot's maintaining speed as you come through the turn. And then our last one for the toe turn, instead of turning your foot to the outside, you're basically coming in, and it's used on puck recoveries. So if you watch players as they're coming back for the puck, in order to close that gap between them and their pressure, you'll see them slow up with their feet. So basic toe turn is turning both your skates, almost like slalom skating, but you've got a deceleration where you're riding on your flats and using that to create deception space for themselves. So in a brief way, that would be kind of how we would describe those. And we teach a ton of different techniques when it comes to tight turns, but those are probably some of the ones that players struggle with the most is the toe turn, the jam, and the punch.
Where's your weight distribution on those turns? I mean, the inside leg compared to the outside leg.
Yeah, so on your entry, we talk about the weight being onto that outside foot. You've got to be able to unweight that foot so that you can engage it. And then one of the biggest things that players struggle with is that when they're doing the punch or the jam, is that they'll either engage the toe or the heel. We talk to them and we do a ton of work on the flats of being able to find that mid-range on your blade where you're not losing too much speed, but you're able to engage the blade and have some variance with how hard you're digging into the ice. So a big thing for us with all those techniques is the ability to not lose a ton of speed. Like, we want to see players get comfortable being able to engage the blade, but not engage it to the point where it stops you. You want to have variance and a good feel on with your skates to be able to engage them. And that leads into, we've started doing a ton of work on decelerations now. So not only teaching players on how they can accelerate, but also how they can decelerate, just again with slight variances in how they engage their edges into the ice. So
I don't think you hear about that very often at all. So I think we need to follow up on, what do you mean teaching deceleration? Everyone's telling us nowadays, right, that we need to go fast, fast, fast.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it came up a little bit last year with our pro group. You'll see guys do it a lot off, it's more isolated in a shootout situation where you'll see a player coming in, and you'll see it a ton right now. Guys will come in and then they'll turn one foot and just kind of stop up. And you'll notice what that does to the goaltender. It's at the top of his crease. The guy's coming at him with speed. It pushes him back into the net, which opens up more of the net for him. So that's just one variation you'll see of it. You'll see it a lot off the rush. So on zone entries, guys will push the D back and then just a slight, deceleration. It's not a huge full stop that they're coming to, but you'll just see them decelerate a bit. And what that does is it opens up, a whole lane for them or a whole option. You think about yourself as a defenseman, D-men are getting pushed back. Now they've got to transition to close that gap because you've decelerated. And like I said, we're not looking for a full stop. We're just looking for slight turns in the skate. So the toes turn in, just like when you're first learning how to stop, you learn how to, push both feet out and you stop like that. We're just getting into how you do that now without coming to a full stop. So, it's a big skill that, we're trying to get players more aware of and an understanding of what it creates for them off the rush and in zone entries, and controlling the space you have on the ice is such a huge thing now. So it's a big thing we've been working at.
Johnny, when I was young, learning to ski, that was French fries and pizza. French fries when
There you go.
They still
All
teach
about the
that.
pizza. I remember that.
Oh yeah.
I took a skiing lesson and they still taught that. So that's still alive and well. Jeff,
There
where
you
does
go. They're applying it on the ice.
Yeah, that's right. Jeff, where does video enter into the equation with all of this?
Well, video for, I think, both John and myself is massive. So years ago, my master's was in sport biomechanics, which was basically old school video analysis. We were still using VHS tapes and trying to combine video and annotate it and everything like that. And it took forever, but the value that you got from the video, because, the human eye can only see so much. And now with, how easy that is to do with an iPad or a tablet on the ice, and the real benefit, for video analysis, you can go heavy into the motion analysis and the biomechanics and get all kinds of numbers that you want, which is great for the scientist and sometimes to provide that information to the coach. But really for video, for us, is being able to provide that real-time feedback to the players. So when we were talking earlier about when John and I were on the ice together this summer and we were doing the sprints, John was videotaping the sprints, and I had our timing system or our measurement system. I would come over to him with the numbers, and he would have just recorded that 20-second video, so that the player isn't even back down to see us yet. And I'd be like, "Oof, blew that start." And then John would be on the video. "Yeah, look at the blade slip on the ice." So player comes back, "What was your time?" If we just gave them the time and they don't know, that, well, I don't know why my time was bad. We might not have even seen the blade slip. And, but once you can put content into that and say you were, 20 seconds of a second slower, but here's the thing, you slipped in the first meter, the other 19 meters were faster than, so your overall time was slower. And that, because that's where numbers can be deceiving. If you're just giving a number and you're not really sure what to do with, guys can be thrown off, and it could be like, "Oh, I was slow today." Well, no, it actually wasn't that you were slow today. You were slipping. We were trying a different technique and you were slipping on that technique. And when you can put those kind of numbers with the video, and John, you can chime in here, but I think the majority of the players love that, right? Because now they have a real tangible thing that they can work on. And it's not rocket science. It's getting good blade engagement or something, like things that they can actually fix up within the course of a couple skates, or maybe within that skate. So
that was something I was just going to ask you about, is that blows my mind that, and I've seen it up close too. So I know it's true that these NHL and pro guys can just fix something almost in live time and just add it to their game. What about for your younger clients or, kids that maybe come to the rink? How do you, I don't know, basically what's your plan? How do you integrate that into their game when it doesn't happen overnight? How do you build that trust so that they know that, even though it might not be an immediate return, that it's the right thing to do?
Well, John and I were talking about this today, and then I'll turn it over here, John. But we learn a ton from the kids. So, and John and I both have young boys, and then the players that we work with. But sometimes they're flipping these things around and learning quicker than our pro guys, and they're just, they're in that, their plasticity is at a peak in the age that they're at, and they don't have something that they've repeated a million times. Maybe they've only done it 1,000 times. And so sometimes that neural network is easier to flip over in a young player. And they can be, depending on who that kid is, they might be motivated by numbers, but that's actually where, John, you can speak to a few things, but that's where we try a lot of stuff before we even try it with our pros, because, they don't have a filter and they'll tell us, Dad, this is a stupid idea, or, so.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because oftentimes you look at pros as being able to make those adjustments quickly, but it's like Leet said, like they've done it for years. So in a lot of cases, it's very hard to make those adjustments in them. The other side of it is my son and my daughter's just starting out now too, but the things that we learn from them and we gain from them, whether it be teaching or seeing them do something after you tell them to do it, spawns you onto these different ideas. And like Leet said, we're constantly coming on in talking about different things we did with our kids or that we saw them do. But I think the real reward for them is obviously, and I would come back to some of our clients, the real reward comes in seeing them succeed at something. And this goes back to even when I started doing skills at, a skating school back in the day, when I was 15. The real reward comes in, that repetition with them, and then them being able to do it, and them looking at you and being like, I did it. Like I was able to do it. I was able to get on my outside edge. I was able to do that. So I don't know if it's so much judged in, game transference at the younger ages. Obviously there's certain ages it starts to count, but at the younger ages, it's more just, oh, I did it, like is mastering that. Right. So I think that's where the reward comes for them. The game side of things, as players get older, we do a lot of work with game analysis too. So it becomes more apparent that players have to take what we're teaching them and transfer it into games. So, a big way we do that is, we work with players and watch, film for them and break it down for them. Our pro players, we do a lot of stuff with them with watching game film and giving feedback. But it still comes back to those basic things that you guys touched on. It's not reinventing the wheel with pros. They got to work at the same things that, a lot of our younger players do too.
So how do you find that balance when you're training these guys, whether they be youth or all the way up to professional, in the summer? Because obviously their bodies need to take a break, and maybe it's a good start for Jeff of just what kind of load management you're doing with these guys.
The first 4 to 6 weeks, honestly, is a lot of that is just correcting movement patterns again. So, they've, whether it's an 8 or 10 month season, depending on how long they go in the playoffs, shoulders, hips, everything like that is we actually, our coaches do a great job off ice of, just realigning a lot of that. And we know at that point their bodies need a rest sort of physiologically. And so, again, it's really starting to build up that strength base again too. So the functional movement patterns, a lot of isometrics the first couple weeks, just getting them into positions, reactivating some of the muscles that, as weird as it sounds, to be an effective skater or a baseball pitcher, you actually are very effective at not activating some muscles because you don't want that co-contraction resistance. So it's really just kind of rebalancing them a lot of times, for sure. In the first 4 to 6 weeks, movement patterns, that's one thing that I feel we do really good at the rink, is synchronizing that with Jon's skill development. So they're there in the off season. What does it look like? How many times a week are they going to be on the ice? When does that start? How hard are you going to be pushing them on the ice? How do we structure? So honestly, our periodization is one thing, macro or micros, whatever you want to call it. But I think on a weekly basis, we do a really good job when it gets to that intense part of the summer is pushing them, obviously really hard, but not taking away from the energy that they're going to need on the ice, and really trying to complement, because it's no good for John if we send everyone down onto the ice and they can't walk because they had, a huge leg day or whatever. So I think that is a little bit of an art and a little bit of a science, but I think that that's so important for the players because, if they're gassed physically, to be able to pick up or learn a new technique when you're neurologically and physiologically or physically fatigued, or that's not going to happen. There's enough evidence out there to show that. So when people are acquiring new skills, their body has to be in a state that's ready to be able to learn new neuromuscular patterns.
Wonderful. Love to hear that. I have a few follow-ups on some things that we touched on earlier, especially with your big fancy word, basically saying calf muscles. I'm convinced that the most important element of a skater is actually their ankle. Am I right in saying that? Why or why not?
You're preaching to the converted here. No, I mean, as weird as it sounds, for years, I've been looking at trying to modify skates to be able to give that ankle mobility. And you hear constantly, and I heard it when I played a lot, Leeds, bend your knees. And I'm like, I'd be in the gym. I felt but I couldn't bend my knees on the ice. And then, as well as I should have, but a lot of times that's anthropometrics too, in terms of your size of your shin, your thigh. But if you can't move your ankle, you're essentially going to tip over in your upper body. So if you're watching a game tonight, and it does happen in the NHL, their NHL players look at their shin angle. And if it's pretty much vertical, I can guarantee you their upper body is pitched over more than a guy like McDavid or McKinnon that are sitting back well and have that good ankle mobility, because you have, it's got nowhere else to go. And, part of the reason as technology has advanced and making skates stiffer, etc., it's really taken away from that, dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. So yeah, we want lateral stability, which is good, but we need to be able to, bring the top of our foot up to our shin and also kind of press it down. And I always use the analogy of, if you splinted a major league pitcher's wrist, think of your forearm muscles aren't, that huge compared to your shoulders and biceps. Is he going to throw out 90 miles an hour? And there's no way, right? Because part of the transfer of that force, it's called summation of forces, and it has to go through your hip joint, your knee joint, down to your ankle joint and get that snap or whatever that may be. And if you're taking away from that mobility, you're essentially immobilizing the ankle and paralyzing your calf muscle. And, it's hockey players aren't known for having, huge calf muscles, but, a lot of that is, you look at skates 40 years ago, they had no ankle support. It was a piece of leather that they tied up, and the stride was different. It was shorter. But I mean, essentially, if you take away that ankle flexibility, I think it is a huge impact. Now, a lot of players have compensated over the years and been able to, accomplish what they accomplished, still get it to a great rate of speed. Theoretically, that may be a reason why I think it's definitely related to high ankle sprains. So now you're getting a sprain of the ankle above that stiff boot. And then also, moving up to the hip, you get up to the hip and it's a difficult movement. And if you ever have a buddy that has an ankle injury and he's walking around with one of those boots on, put that boot on and try to do a squat, and you'll get a pretty good indication of what that does to your mechanics.
That's just cruel and unusual.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. No way.
I gotta admit, I've never experimented at all with how I tie my skates, and I think I'm going to now. Should I not tie my skates up to the highest eyelet and also not tie them as tight, or would that be over dramatic?
I first of all, I wouldn't do it. Like if you're going into a game, I wouldn't do it. But if you have some time, even the 15-minute warm up, I definitely undo the top eyelet and also release some of the tension in the strings. Because what happens, and not to get too much into anatomy, but if you're too tight on the top of your foot, and we've all had numb feet in skates, there's some nerves and important nerves and blood vessels that run right in that area. And you're essentially, compressing those, and that's why you get the numb foot. Well, the techniques the way I skated, it didn't matter if my feet were numb, but with Jon, right, the way Jon skates and what he teaches and all the blade engagement, inside edge, outside edge, flats, you have to have a pretty good feel and a grip of the sole in your skate, because a lot of that is foot movements that you got to do, those micro movements to, for a jam turn, if you're doing a slight turn this way or that way. And so that's the way I feel though, Jon.
Well, yeah, no, like Dan, one of the first things we get players to do is we'll get them to try that off the ice. And it's a great example. We actually do it in the gym, is we'll have them work at basically showing us a squat with their skates on. And some players are able to achieve that shin angle we're looking for. But for players that aren't, right away it shows them there on video, and then we're able to take that one eyelid down and show them that same movement. And then from there, we did a lot of work during COVID with a lot of our players, working at squats, working at that plantar flexion that Leitz talked about, just getting them comfortable doing that and showing them the mobility they can get off the ice before jumping on the ice and doing it. We've had players that do what you suggested there, Dan, and it's like they're going back to intro to hockey the first couple of times they come out. So
Just Bambi out there.
Yeah, I've got a good follow-up on this.
You could try it out. You could try it out and see how it goes, but I would recommend trying it off the ice a little bit too.
So I do some skating lessons in the summer with some guys, and I always tell them they need to go down at least one, and if they're comfortable with that, try two.
Yeah.
See what that feels like. I personally just do one. I'm not that strong in the ankles and calves. I'm weak like the rest of us hockey players there. But then I'll even take it a step further of like, and this may be right or wrong, so you guys tell me, but I personally will do a warm up without my skates even tied.
Yeah.
Just to kind of like build that strength through there. It's not so much that I'm trying to get bulked up and like have the baddest ass ankle of all time and whatnot, but just build some strength and stability through that without my skates tied, and then time up before the game goes. It's men's league, so 5-minute warm up, but I think it's valuable. And even just the players I do, they at first they do it and they're just wobbling everywhere, but I found that it's worked. Help them engage their blade at a much stronger ability. It's not so much slipping, but they're not pulling that blade out from under themselves too early.
I think that, that's 84, 85 Oilers right there. For the first 10 minutes of every practice, they weren't allowed to tie up their skates. Like you said, Greg, if you're never practicing, you're not doing it to get bulky. But if your foot never feels what that feels like because you have your skates laced to the top and it's tight, how can you train that, right? Like, so if Jon's trying to get somebody to learn, to get on their flats, which might take a little bit of inversion, eversion, if they don't know what that feels like because they've been splinted in their skate all the time, they're not going to be able to replicate that pattern when Jon tells them to. So by you having them undo their skates, they're going to figure out, oh, geez, I can do this with my foot. And so it is getting those messages through the nerves and that neuromuscular pattern that, oh yeah, but if you've never done that, that pattern isn't there. You haven't built that pattern, neuromuscular pattern yet. So you wouldn't be able to do it.
It's hilarious hearing them complain about it the first time, but then after they do it a few times, they're like, oh, it's just amazing. I mean, I love it because it allows them to feel that inside and outside edge, and as they're rolling that blade.
Yes.
Again, it's the same back to what we started on, is the importance of that glide and being able to choose when you go on what blade.
Yeah.
Well, we've even talked about, when we've tested it with some players, is how sore certain parts of their feet and even into their legs are because they've never engaged those areas of their feet or their calf muscle, as Leitz touched on earlier. So it's huge. And, just to build on kind of what you were saying there, like, again, coming back to Dan's question, the younger you can get players, comfortable with that, like Leitz and I were saying before, we're testing stuff with our kids all the time. My daughter, you know, we work at having her one eyelid down right now all the time, and she's, you know, bending her ankles in, but she's getting used to developing those muscles, right? So I think it's a huge factor. So
Awesome. Well, thanks guys for coming on. I got one last question and one clarification. Just shin angle for our listeners is basically ankle, knee, where that angle goes, the further you can push your knee out, the greater shin angle.
Yeah.
Am I correct in that?
Yeah. And really, if you look at, I always just look at how vertical it is. So if you see a player skating and their shin is, you know, from the ice to the, you know, the ceiling or whatever is just straight up and down, then you're having some ankle mobility issues. So, and usually, you know, we're talking, you can get a good 30 degrees from that angle if you got good ankle flexion. But if it's right around that range, then there's a good chance, like you said, that they just don't have the ankle mobility that they need. And it's usually not anatomical, it's equipment related.
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, and usually with that, we're looking at like the shin angle, but also the upper body, like Leeds touched on, right? So if those match up, then you're usually in a pretty good spot with your skating.
Oh, John, thank you for leading me into exactly where I wanted to go with this. We talked about earlier not going back and forth like a sprinter, but more so counter rotation. So a lot of bit with the upper body there on skating. I think that's one last item we need to clean up and touch on, and then we can call it a night.
For sure. So
where do you guys feel about that? Because obviously we're not going straight and back, more counter rotation. Are we trying to hit the elbow, getting up there, or how do you guys teach that?
Well, so for us, we go back to the basics. We literally use a clock. So if you picture a clock and yourself being in the middle of a clock and your skates are the middle and you're facing to 12 and 6 is behind you. If your stride is going across your body to 4 and 8, like you talked about, or if you're doing a start and you're back to kind of 5 and 7, your arms should be along that plane to the opposite side. So if I'm striding out and I'm pushing to 4 on a clock, that means my arm is coming across that position over into like a 10 position, 10, 11 type spot. And we try to tell players, obviously we don't want to exaggerate it all the way across the body, but we do want to have it coming. We talk about within the shoulders, but that same directional position. So if you had a box off your shoulders, you're not going to have your arm come across like this. You're reaching to the front of that box, front of the box to the other side, but it's all based off that clock and those positionings that we try to reach to.
All right, Jeff, anything to add before we end it here?
Nope. That's yeah, I'm John nailed that one.
Love it. I can see the camaraderie coming through with you two guys. The rink's got to be a fun place to be around.
Oh, it's a great spot. Great spot. We're just getting things going in Kelowna too, so you guys should come out and visit us. We can get you out to Kelowna.
Kelowna's been on my bucket list. I got to check that place out. I'm serious. Everybody says it's like the best place in the world.
There you go.
They're in Banff. They're on my checklist. I'm going to get there someday.
Nice.
Well, you go to Kelowna and then go through Banff and then come to Winnipeg. There's your road trip.
Yeah.
Got it all mapped out for you. You hit both.
How come Winnipeg didn't make your list?
I've been to Winnipeg. I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never coming back or what?
I didn't say that.
It's like Cleveland. It's not really on anyone's list. They just find themselves there and like, whoops. Well, thanks guys for coming on. Really appreciate it. Went a little longer than we probably normally would, but I think it's just jam-packed with so many good items that if you want to be a better skater, better hockey player in general, you definitely need to get on this.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Greg. That was awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for tuning into the Hockey IQ podcast. We are Hockey's Arsenal, Greg Revac and Dan Dukart. Together, we've come together to create a platform and a community to expand on hockey intelligence, hockey IQ, whatever you want to call it. We're very passionate about seeing this game played smarter and better and continue to develop itself to the next level and staying on the cutting edge of things. So you can find us at Hockey's Arsenal on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We're also at hockeysarsenal.com. From there, you can find some resources and some options to work with us. We're excited to continue this. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, follow, and share. You can also join up for our newsletter as well, where we're going to tackle anything hockey IQ related. So we're excited to have everyone here and continue to build.